Hi students, welcome to NSCI333 Invasive Species Walk. We're going to take a little walk around campus and see what kind of stories invasive species are writing on our campus. We're going to see battles over life and death. We're going to see success stories of how we've controlled invasive species, and we're going to see what our campus has to offer in the way of helping to bring more native species back to the area. So we're going to visit several sites on campus, and I hope you enjoy this tour. Make sure that you make note of some of the species because you're going to have a little assignment to go along with this, and enjoy the video. What we're looking at right here are some native cattails. So cattails evolved here in the United States, and the Native Americans used them for baskets, and they use them for food. They would eat their roots, they would eat the seeds, the brown heads, and they're very useful for birds, for nesting, and also insects. And birds love to nest in the cattails because it provides them good shelter, but also provides them a way of escape. It's easy to get through because cattails don't grow super dense. But if we look to the left, there's a life or death battle going on here. You can see at one point there's another plant mixed in there with the cattails, and that is the invasive species, Phragmites, and it's also called common reed. And this came from Europe, and it evolved in Europe, and it has animals in Europe that eat it and use it. But here in the United States, there's no animals that find it useful. If you look at how thick and dense it is, birds are afraid to go inside there because they're afraid they'll get trapped and a predator will eat them. Also, the Phragmites, if you can see, how would it compete with cattail? How do plants make their food? They make their food from sunlight. And if you notice, the Phragmites, or common reed, has a distinct advantage. It's very tall, isn't it? So if they're competing for the same sunlight, where those are mixed in, you can see those cattails are going to be slowly diminished because they're not going to be able to get enough sunlight. Now, a few years ago, we had a student that was kind of monitoring this situation and was keeping the Phragmites in check. But that student graduated, and you can see that the Phragmites has taken over a huge amount of this area. You've walked by here many times. You probably never realized that there was a battle for life and death going on here. The Phragmites is taller, it's denser, it grows fast. They have rhizomes that spread underground. So even if we pulled all these out, the rhizomes would be able to spread. They also don't have anything that eats it, and don't have anything that, keeps the population in check. So they're able to spread very easily. No birds will nest. And as you can see, this used to be all cattails, but now the entire area to the one side is all Phragmites, and right here where the real life and death battle is going, we'll see the Phragmites slowly creep over and completely take over this area. This is a wetlands, and it's what these plants live in, the wetlands. Just a few feet away from the battle between the cattails and the Phragmites, or common reed, are some more invasive species, Norway maples. Now, these three trees here were planted by U of M grounds crew, and they're a favorite of landscapers and groundspeople because of their nice look and their nice shape. But the name of the tree is Norway maple. So where do you think Norway maples come from? That's right, Norway. They did not evolve here like our silver maple and our sugar maple. We have native maples, but they've chosen to plant Norway maples. Norway maples, in effect, are food deserts for our local native animals. They did not evolve with the Norway maple. They do not eat the seeds. They do not utilize the tree for nesting and such. And so what we have is, in the case of many invasive species, we ourselves have planted them in areas, and they seem pretty harmless here because our forest is on the other side of the science building. However, wind is a factor, and wind can blow seeds to our forest. Now, if you look at the Norway maples, right now they're not in seed, but they have large numbers of seeds that are dispersed by the wind. They invade forests and forest edges, and they also form a very dense canopy, and that inhibits sugar maples. Now, if you look at the roots of this Norway maple, the roots are above the ground, and the roots give off a chemical as well. Anything that tries to grow in that area under the tree, by the roots, will fail. So even if a silver maple seed landed there, it would not be able to grow because of the chemicals in the soil. It changes the soil chemistry. They have very shallow roots, which compete with our native grasses, and this really has an effect on biodiversity in our forests. So even though these are beautiful looking trees, nice green trees, they're invasive. Now, they're not marching through our ecosystem like the Phragmites is with the cattails and just gobbling up the cattails, destroying them. They're actually here seemingly to be, pretty harmless. However, if the seeds get over the buildings and to our forest, that's another story. Okay, if you look along this sidewalk, along this small little forest that we have in the middle of campus, you can see right along the edge of the forest there's a very large shrub growing, and that's the European buckthorn, which came here in the early 1800s, probably as an ornamental shrub. People liked their shrubs in Europe, and so they brought them over here. And this European buckthorn has dominated our local ecosystem to the point where it's almost eradicated our native dogwoods. We've replanted some dogwoods in our natural areas, but you can see this entire margin is European buckthorn. And they have an ally in that birds will eat the buckthorn even though the berries are not the highest quality food. It's kind of like bird junk food, but the birds will eat the berries, and of course birds fly, and of course birds go to the bathroom, and so they'll drop the seeds with their own little fertilizer packet all over our forests. And this European buckthorn has pretty much dominated this entire forest edge, which used to be our native dogwoods. In the corner of this little forest that's in the middle of campus, where the buckthorn has definitely been dominating and outcompeting our dogwood, there's a little remnant of dogwood that survived. But you can see a lot of dead wood. You can see a lot of dogwood that has expired already. There's one little area where the dogwood has survived, and you can see the white berries of the dogwood versus the purple berries of the buckthorn. But look at how tall the dogwood is compared to the buckthorn. What advantage does the buckthorn have over the dogwood for survival? Remember, plants make their energy and food from light. And the buckthorn has a distinct advantage when it comes to light. If you look at the seeds themselves, if you look at the fruits, that is a very high energy, high quality food. When you do your simulation, your invasive species simulation, and you have the jelly beans worth 1 point and the jelly beans worth 3 points, the dogwood berries would be the jelly beans worth 3 points. It's a very high energy food, and you'll be doing that simulation soon. Whereas the buckthorn would be the jelly beans with 1 point. It's still food, but you might consider it junk food. It's just not the food that the birds evolved with, that their guts are used to, and that is most, it's the best food for them. If you look at some of the areas where the berries were growing, there might be one berry left on a whole little section. The birds have eaten all the rest of those berries. Birds love dogwood berries, and they'll tolerate the buckthorn berries. However, as you'll see in Julie Crave's research, the birds are eating the buckthorn. They are eating the buckthorn. They are surviving on it. But the preferred food, the dogwood, is slowly disappearing. Along the fence, along Fairlane Drive, we have a bit of a management success story here. So there used to be American bittersweet, which is our native species, which was growing along the fence, and then some Oriental bittersweet, which most likely is brought here for ornamental purposes, because when the fruit comes, it's a bright orange fruit, and a lot of people like making wreaths out of it with these bright orange fruits. The Oriental bittersweet, instead of out-competing like the Phragmites and the buckthorn did, the Oriental bittersweet would hybridize with the American bittersweet. In other words, when you would cross an American bittersweet and an Oriental bittersweet, the next generation would be 50% American, 50% Oriental. Now, the next generation after that would be 25% American, 75% Oriental bittersweet, and so on, until basically the Oriental bittersweet would just dominate the area. So invaders don't always outcompete. Sometimes they come and they actually hybridize with the natives and outcompete them, or take over that way. But if you can see all the dead wood, Rick has been religiously spraying the Oriental bittersweet with an herbicide at the right time of year, so it's most effective. And this herbicide, by the way, the ones he chews, will not affect the soil biota, the animals in the soil. And he has effectively taken out the Oriental bittersweet. Now, the American bittersweet is still gone. But if you can see, what's growing in its place is grapes. And grapes are a native fruit. They're a native plant to this area. And since the very vigorous Oriental bittersweet has been decimated, the grapes can now move in. And again, they're native fruits. They evolved here. There's a lot of things that evolved here with them. There's a lot of things that eat them. And so it's kind of a little success story on our campus. There is still a little bit of Oriental bittersweet here and there in the forest. It will grow up trunks and kind of, it will strangle our native trees. But Rick has been very diligent, and he knows where those patches are, and as soon as the right time of year comes, he will go in and get those. So we do have a nice success story here along the fence on Fairlane Drive. Okay, there's another invasive species of the forest that has just been a real nuisance in the Midwestern forests, called garlic mustard. And garlic mustard was probably brought here around 1868, or discovered here in 1868. Probably brought here by settlers for food and medicinal use. Where they came from, they had garlic mustard and used it for food and medicinal use, and then brought it over. It is a very, very invasive species. It can tolerate very low light. The seeds can stay alive in the soil for years, so even if you destroy it and pull it out, there's still a large seed bank in the soil. No herbivores here like the taste of it. Now, where it evolved, where it came from, in Europe, there were herbivores that preferred it. But a lot of the garlic mustard has taken over a lot of forest floors, and I'll put a video on Canvas in modules that shows you some forests that are just pure garlic mustard. All the native wildflowers and native plants are gone, and since nothing eats them, they can just proliferate. Another thing about them is they are the first things to sprout. And so in the spring, when the little wildflowers and all the plants are competing for the light, the garlic mustard towers over those things and is able to get the light so that things that are beneath it do not get the light and therefore cannot make their food. This spreads very, very rapidly, and we think it came to the U of M's campus in the 1970s. And we thought, oh, what a nice, cute little plant. And soon after, it was all over the place. Now, Ford Motor Company sends volunteers here every spring, and they gather at least 200 large contractor bags full of garlic mustard. And also one of our custodial staff, John, he's also made it his mission to keep the garlic mustard in check along this fence along Fairlane Drive, and he gets bags and bags of it. So we have gotten it under control now, but it's very unlikely we'll ever get rid of it. Okay, so here we are at the rain garden, the front of the Environmental Interpretive Center. And about a decade ago, this was just a regular lawn. And the people at the EIC got the idea of, why don't we make a rain garden? Why don't we demonstrate what people can do? How we can turn a monoculture, which is grass, which supports very little biodiversity, into this lush, beautiful, very diverse area. So volunteers from Ford and the EIC got together and planted this area with all native species. So this is a very good, beautiful demonstration of how biodiversity can be introduced into an area where was once a monoculture, just grass. We've got some milkweed here in the foreground. Now, milkweed is very important in the life cycle of monarch butterflies. And if there's one thing you can do for monarch butterflies, it's plant milkweed, because that's the only plant that will support the young. They lay their eggs on the milkweed, and the caterpillars will eat the milkweed. They'll form their chrysalis on the milkweed, and then they'll fly away as monarchs. We've got dogwoods along in front of taller redbud trees. These are all native species. This rain garden requires little to no work except for a little bit of thinning out because it grows so well. And the dogwoods and the redbuds evolved here in this area. They have beautiful fruits for our native animals. And also the plants in this area have very deep roots, so there's no watering needed here. A rain garden is a great idea if you have a wet spot in your yard and you want to naturally take care of it without spending a lot of money with pipes and drainage and so on. If you can grow the right plants in that area, you can take care of a wet spot in your yard naturally. And this is a very huge success story. Although there are people on campus who don't appreciate it and think a lawn would look a lot cleaner and nicer and neater, there are hundreds and hundreds of species of insects and little mammals and birds that depend on this area. In fact, there's a goldfinch feeding as we speak. It's eating the berries off the dogwood straight in front of us. There's lots and lots of life in here, and it's just a very alive place, whereas grass would just be grass. Okay, now here's a native species that we could have planted in our demonstration rain garden, but we chose not to. Poison ivy. We wouldn't want to plant it in an area we know children are going to be looking at and walking at and so on. But it is a native species that fulfills a very important ecological role in our ecosystem here. If you look at the berries of the poison ivy, right now they're just forming. And they won't be ripe until late fall. Now the dogwood berries by late fall will be all long gone. They will be all eaten up by the early migrants. But birds that migrate through later in the fall, they still need berries to eat. They still need a food source. And the poison ivy is the food that they choose. It's that high energy, perfect food for them. And we have lots of poison ivy on campus. So you really need to be able to tell what poison ivy looks like, what poison ivy is. And if you look at the leaves have distinctive shapes. And the center one will have two little thumbs. And one side will have one thumb, and the other side will have one thumb. So if you see a plant that's 3 leaves coming from the same spot and that has thumbs. Thumbs are just little protuberances. It has those. It's probably poison ivy and you want to stay away from it. But again, it's a native plant. We don't like it, but the birds love it because when they come through in late fall, they need food, and poison ivy is there with those beautiful berries, the perfect high energy food for the late fall migrants. So in the last few years, some local volunteers from the community have come to U of M and said, we want to make a butterfly garden. So just like our rain garden was kind of a community project, our butterfly garden is as well. If you like butterflies and you want to help the monarch, a butterfly garden is very simple to get started in your yard. You just need some pollination plants, like you see the black-eyed Susans and the purple coneflowers, and you need some plants that the butterflies will lay their eggs on. And you also need some kind of water for them. There's a whole movement of people, just regular citizens, making butterfly gardens and raising butterflies. If you like that kind of idea, go to Facebook to Downriver Butterflies, and you'll see women and men who in their homes are raising hundreds and hundreds of butterflies to help the monarchs and the swallowtails along in their fight for survival. And this has really become a big movement. There's a way to get a certified butterfly garden, which eventually our garden will be. But just a few members of the community came to us, and U of M Dearborn was all for it. And so besides the rain garden, we have a butterfly garden, and in a minute we're going to look at our organic garden as well. As we walk down the bike path from the rain garden past the butterfly garden, we come to a small wetlands area where we can see cattails growing again. And there's no Phragmites here competing with the cattails. The cattails are looking great. If you look down, there's some purple flowers growing, the purple loosestrife. And this is another invasive species. And this species takes over whole shorelines and reduces biodiversity. 20 years ago, many of the lakes, the entire shoreline would be covered with purple loosestrife. It was brought here as an ornamental plant. People love the color. They love how beautiful the flowers are. You can see bees and butterflies love it. But it was choking our waterways. It was lowering lake levels and reducing survival of native species, insects, mammals, birds, turtles. Now, this purple loosestrife has been effectively managed in large areas by bringing in a native beetle from the area where the purple loosestrife was from. So in New Jersey, they did a huge experiment. It was a very risky experiment. They brought in a beetle, the Galericella beetle, and this beetle basically would defoliate or eat all the green on the purple loosestrife. And if the green is gone, the chlorophyll is gone. If the chlorophyll is gone, there's no photosynthesis, no possibility of making glucose, and the purple loosestrife would die. And this has been a very effective management tool in areas where there's huge amounts of purple loosestrife. There have also been controlled burns to burn it down. We have actually been managing the purple loosestrife. It does come back, so we have to keep at it. But the purple loosestrife, even though it's a beautiful purple flower that many people prefer to have in their yards, the seeds do spread, and when they get into wetlands, they can really cause a lot of problems. You can see our cattails are doing okay right now. If we don't manage the loosestrife, eventually it will take over this whole area. As we walk further up the bike path, we come to our community organic garden. And what we have is plots that are rented out to members of the community, and they come and have a garden here. And they grow everything from sunflowers to beans to pumpkins to tomatoes, green peppers, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, anything that you could grow in a garden. A lot of people grow flowers. Some people grow butterfly gardens here. Just lots and lots of potential here. And all the plots are rented out, and there's actually a waiting list. It's a very popular thing. But as you can see on our campus, we're really trying to engage the community and get people involved in gardening, and it's working out very well. Okay, so here we are at the end of our little tour of campus. There were 3 invasive species that I wanted to talk about for just a minute that we weren't able to see. One is the white-tailed deer, which is actually a native species on campus, but because of the lack of predators, we don't see many wolves and other predators, cougars around campus, their population has gotten out of control. So they are a native species, but the lack of predators has turned them into an invasive species. There's car wrecks on Ford Road, on Evergreen. There's deer running through people's windows. Last year, the city of Dearborn approved a deer cull, which meant we shot 34 white-tailed deer on campus. There's a larger herd than that. 34 was all we could get. But that's an example of a native species that actually becomes invasive because the population gets out of control. Another invasive species we have on campus is in our campus lake. Apparently some people got tired of raising their goldfish and threw them in the lake. And goldfish are a type of carp, and they have been extremely successful, and they have basically become the dominant species in our lake. If you walk out, you can often see huge schools of orange moving around the lake. That's our goldfish, which is another invasive species. And the one that you saw in last week's video, of the hidden marsh video, that was the results of the emerald ash borer. Now, the emerald ash borer is a national story, but we know that, we're pretty sure, I should say, that the very first emerald ash borers came to the United States on wood pallets in Garden City, Michigan. So ground zero for the emerald ash borer is Garden City, Michigan. And they have pretty much wiped out the ash trees in this entire southeast Michigan. They're moving north, they're in the UP, they've moved to the eastern seaboard, and millions of ashes have been destroyed by the emerald ash borer. There is a silver lining on that story, because all the dead trees have actually provided great habitat for woodpeckers. So on our campus, all those dead trees you saw on the ground, there's also many that are still standing, but they're dead, and that is perfect habitat for woodpeckers. So since the ash borer has come, we've seen our woodpecker population increase. So we see this law of unintended consequences happening all the time in nature with the ecological relationships. We're sad that the ashes were killed. We're happy that the woodpeckers have increased. We're sad that the white-tailed deer has become a nuisance and has become a real issue in southeastern Michigan. Many communities going around trying to take care of the overpopulation of white-tailed deer. As you look around right here, you'll see that we are just going to open our $51 million renovation of the science building. And there's a lot of fresh plantings here. And I'm going to challenge you, if you want to get some extra credit, to figure out, are these plants behind us? We're between the ASC and the SBCW. Are these new plants that have come with our new renovation, where people in the science department picked out the plants, are they native or are they invasive? Are they a food desert for our native insects, native birds, or are they a buffet? So I'm going to challenge you to try and figure that out.